Red means you're on. See,
On. Okay, got it.
it should be green, but it's red. All right, shall we get started with this late afternoon session? I'm John Newfer, President and CEO of the Semiconductor Industry Association. I must say we are very excited, all of us here on this panel, to be back in Geneva. We are all huge fans of the WTO. I must say that while the free trade debate has had some rough times in recent years, we are very encouraged that the public forum is officially sold out again, and suggests to us that hope does spring eternal. We want to thank the WTO for giving us this great opportunity to share our perspectives of our industry on how we can leverage trade in semiconductors. From our perspective, truly a marvel of humankind, to tackle some of our greatest challenges, including sustainability. Can we move the slides forward? Oh, maybe I do that. Can you get him to move to our deck? There we go. Almost. There we go. All right. There we go. Oh, so just a little bit about SIA, Semiconductor Industry Association. We are Washington based. We are located on K Street in Washington, and we represent about 99% of the US headquartered semiconductor companies, and two-thirds of the global chip industry. More importantly, let me introduce to you a really great panel of experts here today. This panel is actually co-sponsored by the Singapore Semiconductor Industry Association and SIA, our wonderful partner in Singapore. Thanks so much for co-sponsoring this with us. Let me give you introductions to all the panelists, and then we'll turn to them for some brief comments, and then maybe we might have a few questions from the floor. First up will be Anhui Singh, Executive Director of SSIA. Thanks, Anhui, for coming the farthest of all of us. Appreciate that. Next up, I believe it's Nick Montella. He is Director of Government Affairs from a previously unknown company called TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, but now has gained a lot of notoriety lately. In fact, my kids sometimes call me and say, should we buy a Robinhood share of TSMC? And some of you may know that Robinhood allows you to buy small portions of shares in companies. So the kids are doing that now. I never give any recommendations to them. I tell them to get lost. And then third up is Mary Thornton. She's head of trade and export control and was on Web Services. She's very familiar with this building and this town. And I used to work with her at USTR in days gone by. And then finally, but definitely last but not least, is our wonderful ambassador from the Philippines, Ambassador Tihanki, who has been a great friend and supporter of our trade work. And thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Before we turn to them, I'm going to take the prerogative of being the moderator here, of throwing a couple of scene setter perspectives out. Point one, the reason this group is here, as I've said, is that we are diehard supporters of the WTO. We love multilateral solutions. Our supply chains run around the world, and we need multilateral solutions to help us build and maintain those supply chains. And when it comes to WTO, the Information Technology Agreement, the ITA, is the icing on the cake, the bee's knees of trade, and the giving tree of market access. Specifically, the chip industry, our industry, has benefited enormously from tariff elimination. The agreement has provided, probably of all industries, we've benefited the most. But generally, the tech industry, whose products are chock full of chips, share our enthusiasm for the agreement. Just look at this this chart here. What's happened with trade and ICT since the ITA came into force. You know, we can't take full credit, can't give full credit to the ITA for this amazing trend line, but we can certainly give a lot of credit to the ITA, which has eliminated tariffs on a broad swath of pet products since it went into force in 1997. All right, point two, the record is clear. The ITA has been a boon for developing economies that have joined it. Look at these numbers. Well, not the only factor. The ITA has significantly helped these developing economies better integrate into global ICT supply chains. Developing economies' share of ITA exports rose from 26% in 1996 to 63% in 2015. And very importantly, I find this slide extremely compelling. Point three, for the economies that have not joined the ITA, the story is really kind of grim when it comes to plugging into global ICT supply chains. The numbers in this chart tell a pretty compelling story. ITA club membership is a very valuable item for developing economies when it comes to plugging into global ICT supply chains. Point four. If you're an ITA member, you will have strong ICT services exports. Look at India here. 45% of its services exports are ITC. That's really impressive. And that could not be possible without access to the affordable hardware the ITA provides. Okay, let's turn to what the ITA can do for us in terms of addressing some of our biggest challenges. With ITA 2, there are now lots of medical devices in the agreement to help us save lives. When the ITA, when the first ITA envisioned it included computers, telecommunication devices. With ITA 2, we expanded the scope of this thing and started adding life-saving devices that are bristling with high technology in the medical device area. In fact, we would love to see an ITA 3 that would include many more medical devices such as microscopes, medical centrifuges, etc. And in an ITA 3 we would like to see, more to the topic of this panel, lots more tech products that help us address climate change. Those include solar water heaters, wind powered generator sets, 3D printers. 3D printers reduce the need for logistics, trucking, and all of that. In fact, semiconductors are green enablers. I don't know who came up with the English word. I wouldn't look it up in the Merriam-Webster, but I think it captures exactly what's going on here. We are in virtually everything that helps us tackle climate change. Our chips are in smart buildings, 3,000 to 4,000 chips in electric vehicles. Of course, data centers are all about chips, efficient electronics, the harvester of machines that plow fields are bristling with electronics. And then, of course, our energy transmission and telecommunications. And these are all contributing to tackling climate change. So a few final points. Many of the charts and figures I've used here are based on a great new report by the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, also based in Washington, D.C., called ITIF. They did a report a couple of years ago. This is a freshening up of the report with all new facts and figures. It really gives us great analytics and numbers around the benefits that an ITA 3 could bring to us. I would strongly recommend that you download it. It's wild and fun reading. I'd also like to add that global industry is a big supporter of another expansion of the Information Technology Agreement to help us play a more effective and efficient role in addressing our big challenges, including climate change. This statement was signed by dozens of tech associations from around the world supporting another round of ITA product expansion. And now APEC is getting back in the ITA fan club game. It was instrumental, APEC was instrumental in helping us bring ITA 2 across the finish line. In fact, APEC will be convening in early November a workshop on the ITA and what it can mean for all of us in our future. I've talked too much. Let's turn to the main course here. And that starts with Mr. Singh from SSIA. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So firstly, good afternoon to everybody. Let me just,
He's gonna pull it up.
okay. So today I'll give you an overview of Singapore, our landscape for the semicon industry, and also a sharing about where are the focus area for our industry in terms of helping it transform to grow and stay relevant in the entire supply chain ecosystem. And I'll touch a little bit on our country's goal towards sustainability. Yeah. So firstly, I'm Wee Seng. I'm the ED for SSIA, the trade association that represents the semicon industry in Singapore. Now, so one thing to, okay, it's a bit changed here. So if you look at the trend, so-called the ecosystem here that we are seeing, traditionally when you talk about semiconductor, you kind of gear more towards the so-called manufacturers, the chip producers, the equipment manufacturers. Today, when we talk about semiconductor, we have to look at the entire ecosystem. The most recent group that has sprung out over the past years is in the space of energy efficiency. The one that you look at the top right, which is about 1 o'clock, BBP, Semcot, NG. These are companies that are growing very big, and it's really working closely with the semicon industry also. And you'll see the other areas that are also booming, basically the research and development area and everything else. So Singapore has captured this entire ecosystem over the past 55 years. And this year is our anniversary for the semicon industry, 55th anniversary. And that's the reason why, unfortunately for me and my colleague, we only be here for a day because we had to rush back to Singapore for the celebration next week, where the who's who of the industry will be there. You'll probably read about that on the internet and everything else. But my point here is this, right? If you look at the ecosystem here, there are actually 2 points. Number one, traditional, idea of just semiconductor being a manufacturing group is beyond that today. We are talking about having other groups that had to come in. And in Singapore, we actually manufacture quite a fair bit. We are about 7% of the chip producers, and about 12% of the global sales in semicon comes from Singapore. And I think the second point is that we need to continue to evolve also in terms of engaging the other sectors, such like what John mentioned earlier, 3D printing. These sectors and this solution are actually becoming more of a necessity for our industry to thrive in the future also. Now, in the Singapore context, one area of focus is basically on how to continue to transform and grow the industry. So Singapore government has this, what you call the Industry Transformation Map 2025, that's specifically done for all 22 sectors in Singapore. Electronic sector is driven by SSIA, by us. And the main focus for this map is to look at talent growth, is to continue to look at the investment in R&D and advanced manufacturing, and most importantly is to look at sustainability. So that translates to what my organization is doing. We continue to work with institutions and companies to grow talent, not just in the near future, but looking into the next 5 to 10 years. We are starting to grow targeted groups like the IC designers and everybody else. The second pillar is on strengthening and growing the local ecosystem. not just, I mentioned earlier, the traditional areas that you talk about when it comes to semicon, but beyond that, it's about building resiliency. It's about opening out and make sure that we engage beyond just the traditional, space. And lastly, is on sustainability. So Singapore, we do have an unfortunate disadvantage. We are mostly 96% of our energy source is unfortunately natural gas. So you can imagine our carbon footprint is not in a very healthy state. In fact, the entire semiconductor industry itself is what I call a walking contradiction. While we are the solution providers for the climate change solution out there, like solar panels, everything else, the carbon footprint that we leave behind is huge. But if you look at it from another angle, it is also then the one sector that has the largest opportunity when it comes to giving a solution for carbon emission. Yeah. So with that, I'll just touch very briefly on Singapore Green Plan 2030. It is a roadmap that the Singapore government has, and it is a roadmap that we, the sectorial group, will also embrace. Now, Singapore on its own is a very small contributor only to the global carbon emission. It's about 0.11%. But that said, our government is on full trust onto this climate change situation. We are very committed to ensuring that we reduce our carbon footprint. So that's why there's this plan called the Singapore Green Plan 2030 that is not just by any one agency in Singapore, but by 5 agencies. Yeah, it's a cross-agency initiative. And we focus on 5 pillars in this space. We're looking at city in nature, energy reset, sustainable living, green economy, and most importantly, resilient future. Specific to the semicon industry, the energy reset is one of the most important part of it, which is actually driving towards a more efficient so-called energy solution out there. So with that, I just want to make a very quick statement since John mentioned also, one of the key reasons we're here is also because we support WTO and most importantly, ITA. So Singapore, we position is very clear when it comes to ITA, right? We are the original ITA was actually established in Singapore in 1996, and we have been a very strong advocate for ITA 1 and ITA 2 also. And I think we continue to support that, including chairing of WTO committee for ITA in 2020, 2018, and also in year 2000. So with that, right, we are open to look at ITA 3 that John just mentioned, and I'm very sure that my government will continue to support this initiative moving forward. Yeah. So with that, I will give the floor back to John and the team.
Thanks, Singh. Thank you very much, Singh. Excellent comments. Really appreciate that. And now we'll turn to Nick from TSMC. Oh, yeah. Well, there we go. I'll slowly get used to this.
Thank you, John. And thank you, of course, to SSIA for organizing this panel and for the WTO for allowing us to be here to share some perspectives on how global semiconductor trade enables sustainability. So for my part, I'm going to touch on 3 things: a brief introduction of TSMC. Hopefully this audience has some understanding, but just in case you don't, want to make sure we're not leaving anyone out. I want to provide a few examples of how semiconductors do power sustainable solutions. And then I want to touch on a couple of key WTO initiatives that we think are critical to bringing semiconductor-enabled solutions to more individuals and economies around the world. Thank you. So TSMC was founded in 1987 as the world's first dedicated semiconductor foundry. We have global operations in Asia, Europe, and North America. And our mission is to be the trusted technology and capacity provider for the global logic IC industry. In simple terms, what that means is we want to be seen as the premier manufacturing partner for some of the world's most innovative companies when it comes to the manufacturing of semiconductors. Currently we manufacture over 12,000 products for a whole host and wide range of applications. And I really want to underscore that because I think it really shows the centrality that the foundries play in the ICT ecosystem. And oftentimes I don't think that is well understood when we're talking about some of the global trade policies that I'll discuss a bit later on. Um, so as I mentioned, we like to see ourselves as a central piece of the ICT ecosystem. Everyone tends to use a foundry to manufacture semiconductors in some way. And without companies like TSMC and others, we would not be able to meet the rapidly growing demand for semiconductors and for the compute power that we enable. That compute power obviously can be leveraged for a whole host of digitally enabled services, anything from education to healthcare, to vehicle electrification and AI. So I think visually here, what you can see is a number of the applications that TSMC manufactured semiconductor would enable. Anything from high performance computing to IoT devices. This picture of the farmer or of the drone is that drone is equipped with a number of sensors that are able to help farmers determine changes in the weather, light, temperature, humidity, and different things, so they can adjust rapidly their ability to make changes to ensure that they have good field management practices and things like that. We also see, obviously, with high performance computing and kind of the big focus that has been on AI over the past couple of months, that there's a lot of opportunity for supercomputers to help process and analyze vast amounts of data that can then be used in a wide range of applications related to sustainable solutions, whether it's predicting certain types of weather patterns or making accurate weather forecasts and things of the like. So the reason that I showed this slide in particular was because when we talk about semiconductors enabling sustainability, what statistic I find really helpful to put it in context is for every kilowatt of energy that TSMC devotes to production, we've helped the world save 4 kilowatts of energy. So that's a terrific kind of return on investment in terms of helping to enable the green transition. And then, funny enough, as I was walking along the lake earlier this week, I saw that the World Meteorological Organization is celebrating their 150th anniversary. They have all the signs along the waterfront. And if you looked really closely, there was a small portion of that exhibit dedicated to leveraging AI for climate solutions. And when I looked at the actual, like the QR code and scanned it, it was all TSMC customers that were highlighted in this article. So I think you can see that TSMC plays a central role in enabling our customers to deliver these really, really innovative solutions that will help drive sustainable outcomes across economies around the world. That said, to bring it back to a WTO context, again, this slide right here is just really illustrative of how complex the global supply chain for semiconductors are, and you can kind of see how often these goods move around the world. I like to refer to them as the ultimate intermediate good because they are found in just about everything. But I wanted to touch on kind of the three primary WTO efforts that we have found to be extremely important in helping bring these products to more people at more affordable prices. One is the e-commerce moratorium. Another has already been mentioned a number of times with the ITA agreement. And the third is all of the work that the WTO does on trade facilitation. So happy to discuss those things in more detail down the road, but that's kind of how I wanted to set the stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. And you're being a little bit humble about describing your company. TSMC actually, the most advanced chips are logic chips are made in 2 countries. One is South Korea, and the other, most of them are made in Chinese Taipei, and all of those are made at TSMC. And if you Google kind of the most advanced processors that go into computers. I won't name the name of who makes the brand that goes on the processor, but on one processor chip, you'll find 134 billion transistors. That's 134 billion on-off switches in a little tiny piece of real estate like this. So the technologies that Nick and some of the other companies produce are really awesome, really in the realm of science fiction. All right, so next we'll turn to Mary Thornton. AWS actually is a very big customer of our industry, but the industry is transforming a bit, and lots of our big customers are beginning to design their own chips. So with that, Mary, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, John. And I also wanted to thank the WTO for inviting stakeholders again to its annual public forum. Thanks to the US and Singapore Semiconductor Industry Associations for inviting me to speak today. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Mary Thornton. I'm the head of trade policy at Amazon Web Services based in Washington, D.C. It's a pleasure to be back in Geneva. As John mentioned, it's a place I've traveled to for many, many years. So semiconductor technology, it underlies a vast swath of industries across the global economy. And I think after the supply chain challenges and shortages during the COVID pandemic, I think you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who doesn't understand the importance of semiconductors as a foundational technology. And that's certainly true for those of us in the cloud computing sector. So I wanted to start by just giving a quick overview of what the cloud is. And if you wouldn't mind just recentering the slide there, thank you. So cloud computing is the on-demand delivery of IT resources over the internet. It's that simple. So instead of buying, owning, and maintaining physical data centers and servers, organizations of every type, size, and industry can access technology services through the cloud on an as-needed, pay-as-you-go basis from a cloud provider like AWS. Cloud services range from computing power, storage, and databases to the Internet of Things, machine learning, AI analytics, and beyond. I also wanted to say a quick word about our commitment to sustainability, since that's a key part of this panel here today. So in September 2019, Amazon co-founded and was the first signatory of the Climate Pledge, which calls on companies to commit to reaching net zero carbon emissions by 2040, 10 years ahead of the Paris Agreement. Amazon continues to work to reduce emissions across its operations to meet this goal, as well as encourage other companies to join in signing the pledge to accelerate their goals, plans, and programs to address the urgency of climate change. Scientists tell us that we have a limited window to make unprecedented headway towards limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. No one company can do this on its own, and everyone must do their part. Business does not operate in a vacuum. The Climate Pledge community together is a whole economy approach, which can influence vast value chains and supply chains to accelerate real business change. And together we can send demand signals that help deliver the products, the policies, and the goods and services that are needed to tackle the climate crisis. Since its launch, the pledge community has grown to include over 400 businesses ranging from large corporations to SMEs spanning 38 countries and 55 industries. These signatories play and continue to play a critical role in stimulating investments in the development of low carbon products and services. So at AWS, we are responsible and take very seriously that responsibility to optimize the sustainability of the cloud. And this means designing and building the most efficient data center infrastructure possible. And let me highlight a few ways that we're doing this. First, transitioning to renewable energy is one of the highest impact ways to reduce emissions in the near term. As of January, Amazon has over 400 renewable energy projects across 22 countries. And these renewable energy investments help power our data centers around the world. And we're on a path to powering all AWS operations with 100% renewable energy by 2025. We're also reducing carbon emissions across our global operations and supply chain. Our global data center infrastructure is built on AWS's own hardware, which includes purpose-built servers, routers, and semiconductors, which I'll get back to in a minute. We're reducing the embodied carbon associated with the manufacturing of AWS hardware. We work to address and reduce the full life cycle of emissions from raw materials extraction to chip manufacturing by working with suppliers to improve their energy efficiency and powering operations with renewable energy. We've also improved power efficiency by integrating small battery packs and custom power supplies into the server racks in our data centers. These and other efforts are having a real impact on reducing the carbon footprint of the cloud, especially as compared to more traditional IT environments. So there's research that's been conducted in several regions, including the US, and Europe, and Asia, that's found that AWS infrastructure is 3 to 5 times more energy efficient than the average enterprise data center. And this research found that customers who use AWS Cloud can lower their carbon footprint by nearly 80% today and up to 96% once AWS is powered fully with 100% renewable energy. So I mentioned that, like other companies and other sectors of the economy, semiconductors are important to AWS and to cloud computing more broadly. And they're core to our efforts towards building sustainable cloud infrastructure. So AWS builds specialized chips with some of our partners that are designed to optimize performance and power efficiency for data center infrastructure, for our core compute, and for machine learning. For example, our cloud computing instances that use the AWS Graviton3 processor use up to 60% less energy than comparable processors. Inferentia and Trainium are AWS's deep learning accelerators. Inferentia is our most power efficient machine learning inference chip. It's up to 54% more energy efficient than alternatives. Trainium is a high performance machine learning chip designed to reduce the time needed to train generative AI models, cutting training time for some models from months to just hours. This in turn means that building these new models requires less power with energy consumption reductions of up to 29%. And as the global demand for AI compute and machine learning continues to increase, that power efficiency of cloud data centers and the underlying semiconductors will only continue to grow in importance to achieving our shared sustainability goals. So we all know we're in the midst of a tremendous digital transformation globally. Digital technologies are reshaping the way that governments, health providers, companies and startups, academic institutions, the WTO, and other organizations operate and do business. This transformation could barely have been imaginable by trade negotiators and ministers back in 1995 when the WTO first came into being. But today's technology revolution has been facilitated and accelerated in large part by the trade policy pioneers who signed the Information Technology Agreement in 1996 and its expansion in 2015, and agreed to the first moratorium on customs duties on electronic transmissions in 1998. And it kind of reminds me of an Isaac Newton quote, which is, if I've seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. The WTO agreements that I just mentioned are the giants that helped innovations like cloud computing even be possible. Today, AWS has the largest global infrastructure footprint of any cloud provider globally, with 102 availability zones across 32 geographic regions, serving 245 countries and territories. We've also announced plans to invest in 12 additional availability zones and 4 new regions in Canada, Malaysia, New Zealand, and Thailand. And to connect this back to trade policy, it's worth noting, and I had to look this up and figure it out myself, but out of AWS's 32 region investments, only 2 are in countries that are not members of the ITA. Out of our 102 availability zones, 96 are in countries that participate in the ITA. Likewise, the WTO e-commerce moratorium is incredibly important to companies, organizations, and government customers that use AWS cloud around the world. These agreements are a true WTO success story and what this institution is all about. I'm looking forward to seeing what the WTO and this next generation of trade negotiators can accomplish in the months and years to come. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary. That was really excellent. Appreciate those words. Now I think, Mr. Ambassador, you're up. I'll foreshadow your comments by saying that the Philippines is an amazingly important link in the semiconductor supply chain. We were out there in January, haven't been there for a few years because of the pandemic, and the activity that's underway there in regard to our industry is really very, very impressive. So, Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, John, and thank you to the panelists and everyone here. Good afternoon. It's the last panel of the day, and of course, we're having some light refreshments after.
Maybe heavy.
Yes. Well, as John pointed out, indeed, the success of ITA 1 and 2 and the integration of developing countries, which I guess he wants me to speak on, and the importance of a greater contribution of the semiconductor and supply chain of IT would be helped by an ITA 3. Philippines has been working with John and the SIA since we are convinced of the importance of ITA 3. He pointed out to APEC being one of the champions in getting ITA 2 approved. And this theme of today is how ITA and the IT industry can help sustainability, the whole theme of the public forum. So I'm reminded very much by my work as chairman of the Committee on Trade and Environment, where we struggled for years in the Doha round to have an EGS or EGA, Environmental Goods or Environmental Goods and Services Agreement. It did collapse, but APEC again took the lead and passed the APEC 54 environmental goods that are zero or very minimal tariffs. So again, Philippines being an active member of APEC, APEC has connected the dots. So Philippines is indeed a believer in the importance of the IT industry and its role and the whole theme of the public forum for climate and the SDGs. So Philippines is well situated to discuss these issues. Why? The electronics sector, including semiconductors, has been our top export sector, reaching 49 billion in 2022, a significant increase over 5 years of over 36%. So it represents quite a big chunk of our annual exports, almost 50%, and accounts for 3 million direct and indirect jobs. So for the Philippines as a developing country, we know the benefits, although me as ambassador, I don't understand a single thing about this small chip having billions of particles.
Don't worry, I don't get it.
Yeah, but I have instructions from Capital, and I'm convinced by seeing the jobs and the BPOs and the services that it is a contributor. And being WTO loyal, I really think this connection in the public forum this week of digitalization with the environmental goals of SDG is so important. Another point is that we have merchandise trade is indeed 49 billion. However, IT and the ITA sector allows IT-enabled service exports of the Philippines. So again, I have statistics from Capital that our IT-enabled service exports reached $32.5 billion in 2022 and has grown an average of 10% year on year. So again, from the economic viewpoint, development viewpoint, environmental viewpoint, which we'll come to, it is an impressive number for developing countries like the Philippines and our ASEAN colleagues and our community of developing countries to take into account. My next point is the WTO agreements, alongside complementary regional agreements, have helped spur significant trade and job growth in the Philippines. According to the WTO Secretariat, IT product exports covered under the ITA agreement, first launched in 1996, as pointed by Ang Iseng, expanded through ITA2 in 2015, increased from $550 million in 1996 to now $2.5 trillion in 2021. IT products are now the third largest traded product group after fuels, mining, and chemicals. So, as pointed out by John and humbly claimed, not claimed by Nick, highest concentration of ITA product exports, 73%, and imports 56% is in our Asia region, where many countries are participants in ITA 1 and 2, as well as FTAs such as the ASEAN Plus agreements and the RCEP. And of course, some of us are in the CPTPP. Not Philippines, but there are reasons, because we have a long tradition of open markets, and we're studying that aspect. As global value chains continue to evolve, larger integrators continue to source from suppliers located in Asia and that have eliminated tariffs and streamlined rules of origin requirements. As pointed out by John, the global supply chain is not limited to Asia, but is worldwide. But membership in the ITA is indeed a factor for foreign investment, or FDI, or local investment, to come into the picture. So congratulations, John, on the new study by ITIF just issued this week, which makes indeed a compelling case for an ITA 3 scope expansion. And as pointed out in the study, there is a great impact on the SDGs and the climate battle. And so, particularly for those WTO members who have not thought of joining the ITA, Philippines is among those who urge our colleagues and fellow members here in the WTO to take a look at this. My next point, of course, is the complementarity of the IT sector with other trade issues and other global issues that have come into the picture, such as trade and health, and of course, the very successful trade facilitation agreement. The pandemic did show us that the utility of the trade facilitation agreement for essential medical goods like vaccines, masks, personal protective equipment, and how the WTO could react quickly, as pointed out in the various panels yesterday and today. And Alan Wolf just said, on the pandemic issue, members came to the council room and said, what do they need on this issue of trade and health, which is not really a WTO priority or main mandate. Members came with concrete ideas on how certain trade aspects could be done, and the WTO did deliver on those discussions and results on easing and facilitating trade for those important medical goods during that pandemic. So to end my presentation, just a few concrete examples of where IT products have made an impact in the Philippines. One, of course, is in the energy efficiency area, as pointed out by Mary and also Nick, these cloud systems and compelling, how do you say, making it smaller and smaller, the chips, is also energy efficient. Of course, we wonder how the cloud services are now all in the infrastructure of your brick and mortar, where the storage has to be done. And I think, thank you, Mary, for pointing out that where you have brick and mortar, you're doing tremendous efforts to ensure the energy efficiency. For the Philippines, we have used IT technology, and we are now ranked top 10 in pursuing lead, as they call it, leadership in energy and environmental design for our brick and mortar buildings. And of course, the IT and semiconductor is so important in this area, and would note that Texas Instruments, one of our anchor semiconductor investors, has both its facilities in the country LEED certified. Through our 2022 SIPP, Strategic Investments Policy Plan, we are pursuing a whole of government approach to facilitate more investments in green ecosystems. On the issue of renewable energy, the Philippines also has supported the benefits of open data flows, including through the moratorium. And so we are a full supporter of the continued extension of the moratorium. We have witnessed the increased demand for data center capacity, which will be increasingly powered through renewable sources of energy. So last year, the government announced 100% openness to foreign ownership of renewable energy products, which again is important to the semiconductor industry. I would note that your recent report, ITIF report, highlights the use of drones in logistics and medical delivery. And so we are launching several pilots for agrivoltaics, for farm systems. So the third example is sustainable agriculture and the importance of semiconductors. So I do look forward and thank the panelists for their inputs, and look forward to hearing from the audience and from the panelists and John on further ideas. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, really wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Just as a point of reference, the commercial use drones you mentioned are a high priority item in an ITA 3 that we would like to see go forward. Before we turn to questions from the room, let me use my prerogative as panel as moderator here to ask a question or two. We've heard references to the e-commerce work plan, extending the e-commerce moratorium, a potential ITA 3, the trade facilitation agreement. How do these all kind of work together? How do we as an industry think about that when we're thinking about where to put investments? Anyone want to take that up?
Sure. Thanks, John. I mean, I can't say there's any sort of special formula, but you know, when I was preparing for this panel, and sort of figured out that really the super majority of AWS's infrastructure investments are in countries that have participated in the ITA, that was no surprise to me. I recall, you know, a couple of years ago at an ITA symposium, there was another company that mentioned that they only invest in countries that are participants in the ITA, because, and even more, even beyond preferential trade agreements, because the ITA is an MFN agreement. So there's no administrative red tape. You don't need to record keep to prove that, you know, your product meets a rule of origin or regional value content. It's duty free, no questions asked, and that's very powerful, and it's incredibly important as businesses are looking at sort of the costs associated with investments in different geographies, and I wouldn't discount that. You know, as a former WTO delegate myself, you know, when I heard those kinds of anecdotes, they're incredibly powerful, and it speaks to the foundational nature of the WTO and these agreements.
Yeah, and just to add on to what Mary said, I think the way that I look at them often is each is a tool that governments can use to lower the barriers to entry into the ICT global value chain. So the more tools you have to do that, the better the outcomes are likely going to be. And I think as all of the data that was you know, shared here shows, it does bear out that there's a lot of opportunity that's created by these types of agreements. For the manufacturing side of things within the semiconductor industry, if you look at our supply chains, they are very, very globally diverse. We have about 3,000 different suppliers in more than 20 countries. So having that duty-free, access, that streamlined kind of processing, not dealing with a whole bunch of red tape at customs, is really critical for us to be able to deliver products in a timely manner because of how many inputs go into our manufacturing process. And then on the flip side of it, because semiconductors are integrated into so many products that are then sent around the world, you really get like a double whammy in terms of value. So I think that's kind of one other way to look at it from our perspective.
Thanks, Nick. I think it's, if Mary's talking about this anecdote of a large chip company that only invests in ITA member countries, economies. I think there's a little bit more to that anecdote, and that is this company invested once in a non-ITA member country, and it was such a bad experience. It said it'll never do it again. Let's turn back to sustainability. We've heard a bit about a lot about how our sector can help tackle climate change, but it's kind of a interesting balance between using lots of energy to create chips, but also chips playing a huge role in helping us tackle our climate change problems. So is this like kind of like spending money to make money? Anyone want to weigh in on that?
Maybe I'll stick to that. You're right. The current state of the semicon industry is like what you say, John. We are spending money to make the money, but I think the awareness on sustainability is so great these days that we are seeing companies having a very strong commitment to net zero. In fact, most of the companies that we have in Singapore are even more committed to hit the net zero target even before the 2050 targets that was set. Some are even before 2030. So there's a lot of commitment in that space. But for them to achieve this, I think there are many factors that need to come to play. Government policy, of course, is helpful. In fact, is a very big part of it. But also the technology that the companies can adopt fast in implementing energy efficiency, production, and operations in the line, that will play a significant role also. And with the advancement in technology, we know today, many of these is not going to be more expensive eventually. With the demand that is growing, it will be actually more affordable to get this implemented long term. Yeah.
Yeah, John, and I think, from our perspective as well, it's important to look at both sides of it, right? So we also have, very ambitious sustainability goals that we've set forth as a company. A lot of commitments to renewable energy. I think when the agreement was signed, I don't know if it still holds true, but in 2020, we signed the world's largest wind generation agreement. So I think that's on the input side. And then all of those investments and the continued investments in R&D obviously enable us to make chips that are much more energy efficient, that then go into systems like Mary talked about earlier, which are, operating more and more efficiently every day, and then also delivering some of those solutions down the road. So it's kind of hard to separate all three, but it is important to keep them, in the same line of thought, I think.
So, Mr. Ambassador, I'm going to put you on the spot. You're looking the other way. So if a non-ITA member or a member that was not so excited about extending the e-commerce moratorium came to you and said, why should I do that? What are the benefits for me? What are the kind of the top 3 reasons why they should get on the bus and move forward with these things?
This is not the topic of the panel, but we, as chair, a coordinator of the informal group of developing countries, we have had 2 or 3 sessions focusing on global, the digital taxation. So we have had discussions on OECD studies. We've had a discussion of the UNCTAD studies because the root, as fellow developing countries in our conversations, we kind of understand each other. Not like, some countries will get upset. John gets very upset easily. But as fellow developing countries, the way we talk about it is we understand the root cause. And you have some developed countries who are also on the bandwagon. You better be careful. So the root cause is revenue generation. And they are seeing the importance of taxing income where they see profit and income. And governments, especially developing countries, want to be able to easily collect revenue because we need it for infrastructure, we need it for development, we need it for many things. And that is why in our discussions at the IGDC, we have focused on discussing the UNCTAD proposals and the OECD proposals and trying to understand how digital taxation can be achieved over time incrementally. And in those studies, the issue of sudden disappearance of the moratorium on electronic data transmissions is not necessarily the solution to what is desired, the revenue. So we start the conversation, step one, that we understand the revenue generation issue, and even the Philippines participates in this kind of desire. And so we have to study it carefully because you don't want to end extension that has been existing for years and suddenly change the landscape. So all these studies, number one, my main point is all the studies point out to a measured and gradual step-by-step process. And the moratorium extension, which is every 2 years or every ministerial, is an essential aspect. So we don't just step into the unknown. So that's my main argument with them, and buys us some time while we're figuring out, because the taxation is not only on data transmission moratorium, but many other things. And that's why we've supported very strongly the Indian proposition for expanding the e-commerce work program, studies, workshops. So we have an open dialogue, and so we can converge on the best solutions, but not do a knee-jerk sudden thing that the private sector is very worried about. So that's what I say. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much. We have a few minutes for questions, and I see, wow, okay. Let's start over I think you hit the air first. Could you introduce yourself and your organization?
Oh, thanks for that. Simon Lacey from the World Economic Forum. So I just wanted to ask about something that I think it was Nick that's sort of outlined these three pillars of sort of the WTO's work that contributes to the global semiconductor industry. So it was the moratorium, the ITA, and trade facilitation. So I'm just kind of putting it out there. I mean, the JSI would surely be sort of a fourth plank in that if it ever gets done, right? And also, talking about ITA 3 is very interesting as well. It's sort of the first time hearing of that. And I remember quite well ITA 2, and that really only started to get going once the Chinese came on board, right? And the Chinese government sort of asked its industry, would this be something for you guys? And then the industry said, yes, we really want this. And then ITA 2 really started to get legs. So would ITA 3 be another area where, China and the US can actually cooperate? Because we're looking for areas where they have some interests that are aligned, and we're identifying sort of climate change. But would ITA 3 arguably be an area where they can cooperate, or would it just be more sort of confrontation? Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. And I think you should, because my question is a little bit have some relationship with the previous one. My name is Wenhua Ji. I'm a professor from China's University of International Business and Economics in Beijing. So the panelists and did very good presentation on the possible benefits of ITA, expansion ITA. But in terms of the subject of today, leveraging global semiconductor trade, I think all of you and did not touch one very important aspect of semiconductor trade and semiconductor value chain. So we all know that, well, semiconductor supply chain was disrupted heavily by the geopolitical issues. I do not mention who is right, who is wrong. The previous speaker just mentioned it. So decoupling and breaking the chains. So the outcome or the result is that some members have to rebuild for themselves, like China. Some countries would like to take everything at its hand, like US. Everything would better be produced in the US, even not in by the in Chinese Taipei or something else. So how about other countries such as I don't know name the some other members who they would like that, okay, what's the role of the WTO in this regard? What the industry such as John, you represent, and the company that, and the other members, you think the WTO could play what's the role WTO could play in this regard? Because we have some rule books, and we couldn't make new rules. So I think maybe this is one question we should consider. Of course, ITA is useful if it can be expanded, but if the expansion does not solve the problem of semiconductor, I would like to say that what's the real value is for China? Just a hypothetical issue. But why? If I could explain further, now the measures taken by some member against China in terms of the semiconductor, it's really affect China's capacity to enhance our sustainability to get greener, because we have to put a lot of money in some area which the world already have solutions. Indeed, the final result is that everybody, other members are paying high cost in this regard, the products. So I think this is one issue. This is a hard issue, but if anybody would like to share your opinions, thank you very much.
That's a really easy one, of course.
My name is Emmanuel Wachendo from the Institute of Economic Affairs, a think tank in Nairobi, Kenya, and I'm here with 5 of my colleagues. And we've been following the issue of the global trade in semiconductors. And now, what we found is that there is actually actually just illustrated beautifully just by Manuel, that there's a case for the expansion of, let's say, the policy interest in semiconductors as a development question from different dimensions. So if we start from the domain of just consuming these final goods that have chips embedded, demand in the whole world is growing, as it is in the developing world. So in a country like Kenya, Kenyans are much, you guys understand very well how Kenyans, let's say with a per capita of $2,000, are actually rendered much wealthier because of the chips, in spite of the policy failures with regards to raising incomes, right? So Kenyans are much wealthier because of how much computing power they have access to. So, but we've also found that there are many electrical engineers who are themselves involved in importing chips from the United States and from China, and then responding actually to bespoke needs all around the world, and actually designing devices and exporting them back to the United States, back to Europe, to the United Kingdom. And so now our question is, as we embark on a quest to, very exciting quest to actually find what policy hurdles that these manufacturers are facing, right, in a place like Kenya, a country that has industrial aspirations, what advice would you have for us who would maybe perhaps look to creating our own coordinating mechanism, maybe something that imitates your semiconductor association, but in this case, for engineers who are using the chips as intermediates for their products?
try to tackle some of the questions, can't say we can get to all of them. But does anyone want to start out? I have a couple things to say. Anyone want to jump in? You first. All right, okay. Jumping into the boiling water. Okay, here we go. So just as a bit of for historical reference, the reason we were able to get ITA2 going had nothing to do with China. It actually had everything to do with a major member that was in contravention of the ITA that was sued in the WTO by 3 parties and lost the suit and forced and compelled that member to come into compliance with the ITA. And then we're able to jump in the fish tank and start working on an ITA2. Mary, is that correct?
That is my recollection.
Yes, okay. So, but the question about China, so we think that an ITA 3 is an area where not just US and China can work together, but we can work on a constructive project to advance global trade. So, you know, there was tension in the relationship years ago too. And we're hoping that this can be a way to bring us all together in a constructive way. The WTO acting as kind of neutral territory for us to work on something virtuous for the broader good. Anyone want to add to that? Okay. And I didn't quite understand your question about, but I will say Nairobi was the place where at a ministerial ITA2 was concluded. Very excited about that. And I know Kenya has looked to join as a member for a long time. Yes, Mary.
I wanted to react to the last question and maybe not to answer it directly, but it was a really interesting example about engineers in Kenya that are using computing power and then exporting their designs to manufacturers in these developed countries. And that's such a great example for why the moratorium is so important, because it facilitates that flow of data and the ability of countries to be part of this broader technology ecosystem and global supply chain, even if it's not manufacturing. But it's that sending of the data overseas and not having to worry about the red tape of having to file a customs declaration and potentially pay a duty. And so I just wanted to flag that because I think it's an amazing example, and connecting it to some of the issues here. So anyway.
Just to add to the third question, indeed, as pointed out in my presentation, are IT-enabled service exports. So I guess the capacity in Kenya relates to business process outsourcing, value-added services, and then re-exporting. And that falls into the services category. And so that relates directly also to the moratorium. So that's really an important element for that existing sector. But like in the Philippines, it did start with the private sector grouping together into industry associations, because once you have groupings of private sector or these engineers, they can contribute to the dialogue for the domestic policymakers and participate like you're doing in public forum events or international discussions with the WTO. So I think the SIA should definitely support some kind of interaction with the private sector in Kenya. And on our part, government to government, we're always keen to discuss with our economic partners, and especially how we can share our experience And the last point is that from services exports, you have your own industrial ambitions from your, which would be your government's priority, not necessarily the engineers. But then the next step is providing the investment climate or environment for industrial capacity of, meaning foundries and other. And of course, they can move from Chinese Taipei and South Korea and easily look at the Kenyan market. But then Philippines has always offered the talent of its skilled workers. And so if there's that growing sector in Kenya, that will always attract, in the end, the human resources is really what investors are also looking at. In addition, of course, to joining ITA 1 and 2. On the US-China question, I just wanted to add, of course, APEC gave also a push, and US and China happen to have a common membership there. And then so on ITA 3, John has to be very careful in his intervention, since private sector must always be sensitive to what instructions come from above. But as pointed out in the panels during the public forum, US and China are super important, but it's not all of the WTO. And so ITA 1 and 2, US and China are so important, but it's not the whole picture. So there's a whole world out there for ITA 3. And Alan Wolf was just saying, just creating the dialogue, open dialogue towards convergence is the key if you are nostalgic for globalization 1, 2, and 3. And we are now in the deglobalization. But I think, as everyone has pointed out, Bloomberg, the economists, we are in the last stages of the protectionist deglobalization sentiments. Because if we're not in the last stage, the ultimate solution, as we all know from history, is the final solution. So for the optimists, these are the final stages. Then we move to what the DG has said of re-globalization. So for those supporters of detente, or whatever you want to call it, completing the dialogue among ITA 1 and 2 members for ITA 3, then the big guys will see what's going on. That's our only solution as developing countries or smaller countries. Thank you.
By the way, thank you for rescuing me on the China question. We have a time for one lightning round, 2 questions, one back here and one right here, and then we gotta have lightning round answers too, because we gotta release the room. Thank you.
What are your policies on critical raw materials in support your sustainable productions? TSMC and probably John.
Thank you. On the moratorium, a study of the South Center actually said that developing countries and least developed countries actually lost 56 billion euros of tariff revenue. Wouldn't you agree that the countries and sustainability actually need, of course, semiconductors, technology, innovation, but also finance? Because I think it's been said that the revenue problem can be addressed somehow differently. But for our countries, every little money helps. So I would like you to reflect on that, of whether 56 billion which were lost, and this study is backed by the UNCTAD as well, from 2017 to 2020 were lost because of tariffs, because of the moratorium. So that's one. And Mr. Neuffer, I see, and I think it's very nice to talk about ITA 3 expansion on the basis of that study, but isn't it the case that India actually didn't join ITA 2 because it didn't work for them? The promises of ITA 1 didn't deliver in India. There are several studies that we can actually talk about, but to what extent actually ITA 3 could deliver the promises and what is needed for sustainability and the climate crisis? Thank you.
Let me get a couple of quick answers. First of all, critical minerals, we address that with very diverse supply chains. This is something that's very important to us, but we have extremely diverse supply chains to help ensure against risk. As far as your question about does the ITA deliver, well, we had an awful lot of members join ITA too. We hit critical mass very easily. So I think the results speak for themselves. Anyone want to answer anything else here?
Yeah, just in response to the question about the moratorium, I mean, there's been a multiplicity of studies about the moratorium, including a more recent one from the IMF that looks at alternate ways to generate revenue that are more efficient and effective than thinking about putting customs duties on data transfers. So I would suggest maybe looking at that IMF study, because I think it's been relatively well received. And then the other, maybe posing a question back, is, as developing countries think about the moratorium, and if it were to expire, what would the impact on micro, small, and medium enterprises be in developing countries that are trying to develop their businesses and go global and join global supply chains? How would the addition of new customs administration burdens and potentially tariffs impact their ability to do that? Thanks.
Just quickly on the moratorium, yes, on the study, I guess you're referring to, when you say 56 billion, is that one country for India? Is that only India or multiple countries? And then, yes, so very quickly, indeed, we've identified and looked at those studies. And of course, there's one size shoe doesn't fit all. And part of the dialogue is indeed to discuss a case-by-case situation. And on the ITA of India, there are discussions definitely with the semiconductor associations, business process of the private sector, and there is some support for the ITA. But then it's really a dialogue and solving it case by case rather than throwing a blanket solution of a moratorium stoppage. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much. I don't know about you guys, but we've really enjoyed this session. Thank you all for coming here and giving us some of your time. Want to thank Anhui Singh, Mary Thornton, Nick Montella, and Mr. Ambassador. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time, and we look forward to continued dialogue on these very important topics. Thank you. And we have a reception. It's reception at 6:30 at the gallery. You're all invited
Above the canteen.
for light and heavy drinks. Okay, thank you.